So for anyone that doesn't know thus far, of course, Office Hours, I'm one of the co-founders here. We help out quite a bit when it comes to individuals thinking through next steps, a lot of interview prep, behaviorals, technicals, modeling for bankers, as well as individuals looking to get into banking, as well as on the buy side. So whether it be private equity, growth equity, corp dev, hedge funds as a whole. And of course, wanted to connect with Manasa to learn a little bit more around, call it the JPM consumer banking background, if I'm not mistaken, to, of course, working at CVC on their investment team, kind of like the off cycle process, what that looked like to get there. And then more exciting than anything, clock out. Because I mean, like definitely applaud quite a bit on starting your own business and kind of what that looks like. Want to learn more about that, but maybe we start off kind of like with the finance background and then of course how that kind of shaped into what you're doing today.
Yeah, no, definitely. So after NYU, I did go on to JP Morgan. So I was within their consumer healthcare and retail practice. And I was primarily, more on the leverage finance credit side of the world. And so a little bit different than your typical coverage background or M&A. But I actually really enjoyed it because for me, I got the best of both worlds of being able to have a portfolio of clients and kind of seeing how different companies performed after we did said transactions, whether it was M&A, LBO, traditional refinancings. Then we also got to be a part of the strategic story and we're involved with the entire deal team. But I did still enjoy more of the equity story. And so it was important to me when going to CVC to kind of be in their private equity practice. And so you're right that I did do off-cycle recruiting. And I think for a lot of folks, I know that on-cycle is on right now and it's a lot of pressure to get the right offer and to make sure that you're doing everything that you can. I specifically opted out of that process because I wanted more time to figure out what I wanted to do after the 2 years, whether to stay at JP Morgan, whether to go on into private equity, to go into a credit fund, to do something totally different strategy wise. And I'm really grateful personally of taking the time because I was able to diligence all the different types of investment flavors out there, different funds out there, different types of companies. And I got a better sense through the 2 years of what I personally had more of a strength in and where my interest truly was lying in. And so based on those collective experiences, I decided to ultimately go to CVC where I spent most of my times in industrials, global private equity practice. So I transitioned industries a little bit. And then post the 2 years at CVC, I made the uncalculated decision of leaving. And now I am starting my own company, or I started my own company rather, called CLOCKOUT, as you know, and happy to delve into that too. But definitely started off pretty traditionally and ended up pretty atypical. So happy to kind of delve into anything that's on your mind or other people's minds.
Love it. Yes. I mean, of course, definitely would love to learn a little bit more. I guess if we start off a little bit around, just start with call like undergrad. Did you know you wanted to get into banking coming from NYU? Because of course, kind of there is that angle of Stern and business being in New York.
Yeah. So that's a question I always got. And I actually did not want to go into banking. I was dead against it. And it's funny because I was dead against banking, then I was dead against private equity, and I somehow managed to do both. But my first internship at JP Morgan was my sophomore year. And at the time, I really wanted to do something that was both finance oriented and social impact oriented. So I spent time doing an internship within the firm's commercial bank, and I was serving clients across government, nonprofit healthcare, higher education, and I was privy to that world. And I thought it was really interesting in theory, and I definitely learned a lot, but I didn't find it very intellectually challenging at the time because I think you do more at the senior level rather than the junior level. And so through those experiences, I still loved the firm, but wanted to see what the investment bank was all about. And that's when I started to talk to more people, and I figured out which groups kind of spoke to me through that process. And like I said, JP Morgan and different banks house different groups differently, but their leverage finance and credit practice appealed to me because, I was doing a lot of risk level analysis and stronger business diligence, which I really liked. And I liked that the firm had a very strong healthcare practice. So I thought I could definitely do that, but then also learn the technical skill set and the soft skills too.
Love it. And when you were thinking about it directly at JP as a whole and kind of like the experience there, if you don't mind me asking, was private equity on that path? Was it specifically CVC? Had you thought about that? Did they go for on cycle and then you eventually ended up pursuing more off just to learn more? Because I remember you mentioned a little bit around I knew I might have wanted to go down that route, but at the same time, didn't know that I maybe a day on the job, didn't really know. It was a little bit later.
Yeah. So for me, I didn't participate in on cycle recruiting. recruiting. But, private equity was always something that I heard as a buzzword, people talking about. And of course, we worked with them as clients, different funds. But traditionally from my group, most people went on to hedge funds or credit funds or distressed debt funds. So no one actually switched asset classes and moved into private equity. So it was never something that I thought I could do. It was always something that appealed to me just because it was more of I like the fact that it was more growth oriented rather than in credit or in the distressed world. We're always taking this draconian view, even though it is still within the banking umbrella. And I liked it, but I also didn't like it. And I think I wanted to be privy to more strategic conversations. So through the at least 1.5 years before I started actively recruiting, or 1 year rather, I was always focused on credit. And then as I had more conversations, I was thinking about growth equity and growth private equity within healthcare. And then in talking to different firms, CVC appealed to me at the time when I was getting different offers because I liked the fact that they were global in nature.
Right.
JPMorgan allowed me to do global deals and transactions, so I wanted to be able to do the same. And I also liked the fact that CVC was very focused on growth. They weren't turnaround folks, they weren't distressed folks, and they had a growth private equity practice and a strategic opportunities fund. And what that means is you're able to invest for longer periods of time, like 5 to 10 years versus 3 to 5 years. So I like the fact that even if I was in their main fund, I could still do deals that were more growth oriented and more like patient pool of capital oriented. So having different flavors and also being a part of a lean deal team was exciting to me because I was used to that too.
Totally. And so CVC has both practices technically, right? I remember a friend of mine, Saranj, started maybe on the West Coast.
Yes,
growth.
I know him.
And
Yeah.
then maybe he was London, excuse me, no, he started West Coast and then he now moved to London because last time I've seen him was like right before COVID in London. But if you're able to speak a little bit more on that, because many individuals would think about, call it like a Bridgepoint, call it an HG, call it an Advent, but at the same time, they'll think about it being like having global presence as a whole and maybe kind of like a little bit more like London focused, Europe, UK focused, but then they don't really necessarily understand that a lot of these funds are coming to the States as well and giving Premier is another example, right? Giving like traditional upper middle market mega funds kind of like a run for their money.
Definitely, yeah. So CVC is also London based. That's why I think Saranj also went out there. But I personally didn't know that those opportunities existed when I was recruiting in terms of the growth private equity vertical,
right?
Because you just hear about growth equity or venture and then just traditional private equity. But with CVC, yeah, it still felt like a private equity vehicle, but your check sizes were much smaller, but they were still, again, much bigger than the traditional growth equity sense. So the folks in that group were primarily covering all tech-enabled services, a lot of SaaS stuff, which was really, really cool. And we worked with them anytime there was crossover. So like if I was working on an industrials deal, but there was like a tech-enabled component to it where we needed someone from growth to help out or vice versa, we would do that. But you can recruit into those types of silos and those types of groups within the fund right out of banking too. And I think it's a good alternative to doing traditional private equity if you want to have that go between growth equity and private equity, because the deals aren't as big and it's still very techy. And it's a lot of relationship building, similar to growth equity and venture, but it's a little bit more structured still in terms of like the capital structuring and the processes that go along with it, if that makes sense.
Right. No, totally. And honestly, so we connect with many individuals thinking through, of course, next steps, on cycle, off cycle. What was it, if you don't mind me asking, that really attracted you to CVC as a whole and kind of like the opportunity, whether it be connecting with people beforehand, whether it be connecting with people through the process? You looked at other shops as well.
Yeah, no, I did. I was interviewing at a lot of different shops at the time, all different types too, like some that were specialized within healthcare, which is what I was originally going after, some that were more generalist, some that were growth equity, some that were even venture, and then some private equity and credit funds too. So kind of all over the place before I start to narrow down. And what appealed to me about CVC was, like I mentioned, they have that global feel. They're based in London. We had 14 plus or 20 plus satellite offices, and we had the opportunity to really work with our partners across the world on deals versus rather than just exchanging emails. It was more of a collaborative effort, and we were part of the global pipeline every week, and we understood what deals were going on. So it was very, very global in that, from that perspective. I also like the fact that even though I was coming and spending a lot of time in one industry, like industrials, I still had the opportunity to, have almost like a major and a minor. So my major was industrials, but every time there was a deal within consumer healthcare, just given my experience, I was able to still participate in those deals and raise my...
I love it.
Yeah. And also the deal teams were lean, and that's for better or for worse, right? So you get a lot more exposure as a junior, which could also mean more work, but you learn a lot in the early stages of your career, which I think is really, really great. And your opinion is valued. You're a real deal team member. You're not behind the scenes.
Totally. I think that definitely, one, it's really interesting because part of it is kind of that like major and minor mentality around thinking through like, okay, specifically focused on this, but at the same time, like if something does come up, how did that work? If you don't mind me asking, it may not have to be specific, of course, to CVC, but around like asking more for more work, yet being able to, of course, kind of like digest everything on your plate. Yet at the same time, like what if there was like another associate, something of the sort where they were like literally cast on specifically like consumer retail? Were you taking away stuff from them? Were you just like, helping out, assisting?
Yeah, I think when you first come onto a fund, if you have a specific industry preference, especially if you worked in a specific industry before, I think the team in general values that experience and expertise. I wouldn't say expertise with just years of experience, but
of course.
I think it doesn't hurt to ask. Obviously, people have different ways of handling that. But for me, I really wanted to be on consumer healthcare deals. And there's always an opportunity because as we know in this world, there's a ton of transactions and a ton of deals. So they're always looking for people to help out. So even if there's to your point, a person staffed on the deal who is already a consumer associate, you can kind of be that helping hand or at least have the opportunity to shadow if you want to still be a part of it. I would just, definitely pitch your case to your MD or whoever is staffing. And even if it's not the first deal from the get-go that you have the opportunity to join, just continuing to voice that. I think people will listen to it and put you on. Because for me, I knew nothing about industrials coming into CVC. So I was learning a whole new industry and I never covered it. So it was important for me to learn that. And of course, that was a lot on my plate already. But because I was so interested intellectually in healthcare, consumer, they still staffed me on deals when they came up.
Nice. That's awesome. And I'm just trying to think of like, honestly, because these days, of course, like if you look at, there's a massive chart of like the top like 25, 30 private equity firms out there, right? And CVC is definitely closer to the top. As individuals think about this, and you worked now at larger organizations, naturally, a JP, a CVC, it was more boutique, it was smaller, of course, than a JP, and now starting your own. As we kind of like compare this back, what does it look like today, if you don't mind me asking? Well, I mean, honestly, I think that's like the more exciting part, like CLOCKOUT. Tell us more, and then we can kind of get into like culture, dynamics, starting your own shop, going from like how many, like 30, 50,000, how many people are at JP compared to like, of course, like a CVC down to where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, JP Morgan, I have no idea how many people there are, but
yeah,
in the
over 100,000.
Oh, definitely.
I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. CVC was very lean. So in the New York office, I think we had about less than 30 investment professionals. So across growth, across main fund and our strategic opportunities fund that I mentioned earlier. So definitely a bit of a initial culture shock of just being a part of a smaller office, but also more exciting. And then obviously with CLOCKOUT, it's a 2-woman operated show mainly right now. So
I love it.
So definitely not a lot of people, but it takes a village and we rely on everyone to obviously make the magic happen. But yeah, happy to obviously share more about what we're doing at CLOCKOUT and what it is, at least to start with. So what we're doing is essentially building a social ecosystem for the young professional demographic. So think right after college, 22 years old into your mid 30s. And, we're essentially creating different formats for people to socialize in person, create communities, build friendships, but also build their personal network in the process more authentically. So in other words, simply put, it's like college, but in real life, or if LinkedIn, Bumble BFF, and Meetup had a baby. So
I love it.
Yeah. And on the event side, obviously we work with a lot of cool organizations. Like we have about 150 in New York to make that happen. So everyone from like nonprofit junior boards to social clubs, professional networks and groups and communities like you guys, obviously, and trying to get people connected to really cool content and quality content. That's really important to us. So now we launched at the beginning of the year. So we have about 50,000 people in our New York City community.
Wow.
And we're finally now live in London and Chicago. So
huge. I saw that actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're trying to, it's still relatively new there, but we're trying to now expand to like some of the other hotspots for, young professionals like SF, LA, Austin, Miami.
Love it.
Everywhere.
Awesome. Nice. If you don't mind me asking, for the individuals that do want to start something kind of like long-term skill set from finance, from banking, investing to starting your own business, what carries over, what doesn't?
I think a lot carries over from the finance world. I'm not whatever I don't know, we outsource, right? In the sense that like, I'm not a computer wizard. I am not the one coding, I promise. I have a computer science minor, but that doesn't give me any credibility. But I think, being able to think through strategy, the business plan, the market, just the soft skills of building relationships and leveraging your existing relationships really goes a long way. I think I don't regret the last few years of being in banking and private equity because you just learn to think on your feet really quickly. You problem solve, become very detail oriented, for better or for worse. You have this sense of urgency. So you're constantly, I think you have the right recipe for success to have the self-discipline to start something at least, and then cultivate relationships. Of course, depending on what you're trying to build, it could look different. differently. But the one thing I will say is there still aren't a lot of people willing to take that risk, because even though we have the skill set, I think we tend to be as a group more risk averse, and we like to pick stability, and we're good at what we do. So it was really hard for me to have the courage to leave the quote unquote stable job and leave with nothing lined up for myself and just pour everything into starting my own company.
Right. And how's it been going thus far?
It's been great, but there's a highs and lows. Like, it's not rainbows and sunshine every single day. And I think that's why I wish, and I'm sure you can agree with this, but I think that's why it's so important to have a co-founder, because as much self-discipline as I think I have, there are days where I think to myself, is this worth continuing to wake up for? Like, am I gonna, like, I should take a day off, or I should just call it quits before we even launched, right? And having a cheerleader, having a cheerleader by your side really, really helped. Even if you're capable and smart and determined, I think the hardest part about being a startup founder is the resilience to continue to adapt and continue to just pick back up, because it's not always easy.
100%.
But we're definitely happy with the progress we've made to date. So I'm excited and motivated for sure.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I think part of it is like sometimes like taking a step back and like seeing like what you've done thus far, because otherwise you're always consistently in that rut around like, oh, we can do more.
Yeah.
And that's 100% true, right? No doubt. But I think I definitely resonate on the point of like having a co-founder that you can ideate with, and not to mention, of course, just like have those conversations with around performance, what's been done thus far, what you're continuously doing. I don't understand how people start businesses like just like one entity, individual type of stuff, but
I respect them. I can do it personally. I just don't think I have it in me. But for the solo founders there, like, so much respect, because it's hard. It's hard doing it alone.
100%. So it's interesting, right? Because like as an analyst, you're part of like a massive class. So it's almost kind of like that, like resilience to continue to adapt, where that comes into play, where it's like, okay, if you're dealing with some tough angles at work, tough aspects of work, you have 20, 30 other analysts to call on. CVC, you might have like a few to call on. CLOCKOUT, you might have like one, but also like your co-founders doing other things, right? So like, how is that transition? And I think that actually like makes a lot of sense, coming from finance, large organization, to slightly boutiquier, smaller, then starting your own thing, because some people will start fresh out, which is tough.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it definitely initially felt scary to transition from a large organization like JP Morgan to a CVC, in the sense that when you first start off at JP Morgan, or any, I think, large analyst class at a bank, you have a lot of training, a lot of support, a lot of resources. It's hard because you've never expected anything like that, and there's a steep learning curve, but at least you have people around you can lean on to support you. When you're at a fund, whether it's at CVC or elsewhere, you have to do a lot of that on your own. I think you rely on the knowledge base that you have and the skill set that you have, and you have to be a little bit more scrappy. As you take a look at what other people have done, you're more proactive. You're not necessarily asking a million questions, but you're asking more thoughtful questions. That doesn't mean that people aren't there to support you. I think you just have to swallow that fear of, oh, this person is busy and there are fewer people for me to lean on, so I have to like recycle who I'm picking and choosing to ask questions to. But I think that's normal. And you should just still be confident enough to ask those questions. And then obviously with CLOCKOUT, I mean, I'm asking myself, I guess, or my partner, co-founder. But I think
all the time,
constantly. But I think, long story short, I think you just learn to become more scrappy. And I've personally found my voice and have become more confident through the skills just at JP Morgan, and being confident to ask and speak up, right? I think you're never going to know all the answers, so I don't think you should expect that, but I think you should know when to ask, how to ask, and you develop that in your early years for sure.
Nice. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think individuals, as they think about, like, some people will be like, oh, I want to like go down a specific route, and like I think what I've learned is that like it's never necessarily kind of like a one and done, right? You can go down a specific route, and then like if you go down banking, private equity, it's not necessarily like, oh, like this is like my path for life, right? I might do it for a couple of years, figure something out, start my own thing. You could go back to finance if you wanted to, taking that operating experience back. I think there's a lot of movement these days.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think compared to like the prior generations, now people are like moving a lot around, which I personally think is great, because you're learning in the process. And I think it's okay to not have it figured out at age 22, right? And you're constantly learning about what you want to do. And I definitely took a calculated risk. Like, I left with nothing lined up, but I also knew that I had X amount of work experience that I could lean back into, and I had savings at that point. So I was like, okay, let me take this risk somewhat and start my own company. And if, pardon my language, but if shit hits the fan, then I have something else to go back to.
Exactly. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. On the, I guess if you don't mind me asking, what's like the vision behind CLOCKOUT as a whole, right? Call it like 5 months from now, 15 months from now, 5 years from now. now type of situation around kind of like what that looks like and where you really see this going? Is it like kind of like a systemic change in like how young professionals interact with each other post COVID? Is it kind of like pertaining to that? But then of course want to get a better understanding just of like the platform as a whole, because I'm sure you want to enable others to be able to do stuff on it quite a bit.
Yeah, so I think high level with our mission, and we're only just getting started, is to really combat the loneliness epidemic of our generation and the personal networking dilemma that really go hand in hand. And I think it's a universal problem, and it's not just specific to YPs, and it's not just specific to this generation of YPs, but we think that it's important to have a targeted tool and a targeted platform, because at the end of the day, we're all social beings and we like to meet people who more or less look like us and feel like us. So same age, same caliber. And we want to be able to create this community and have that sort of impact. So definitely, yeah, in an ideal world, create that systemic change, right? Make people actually, like, we're continuing to go digital more and more, right? Whether it's off the heels of COVID, more investment in digital work from home interaction and work from home. And so we're becoming more digital creatures, but we all, even though we're connected, we're not really connected in real life. And a lot of people, 3 out of 4 young professionals do feel lonely often or always, whether they have a network or not. And so we want to be able to create those safe spaces for people to create everything from pick up sports games to book clubs to finding the right avenues to go to mixers and galas and get involved with nonprofit junior boards, or just make a new friend in a new city. So we just want to be able to be that resource. Definitely first in the US, and now we're in London, but all over really. Yeah. Because it came out of personal frustration. Like, we couldn't find anything that worked, and then we thought we'd have some fun with it.
Totally. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you had even kind of like listed there, like, we're not another dating app, right? Like, very focused.
Not a dating app. Exactly. Like, I think a lot of people are using dating apps for platonic connection because they just don't know where else to go, right? Like Bumble. Yeah. But no, we're not.
Nice. Can you tell us a little bit more about, like, call it intent to grow team? Is it going to be more of like a New York presence and like an office? Are you going to do like multiple offices, or what does that look like?
Yeah, no, I wish I had a crystal ball into everything, but we are going to be doing our first fundraise soon. And with that, we definitely will be building out our team.
Love it.
So we're going to be onboarding people to help us with, definitely on the sales side and the tech side, building out product. So we're pretty excited about building out the team. So I think in the immediate future, we probably have more of a physical presence in New York, but it'd be fun to traverse and have offices in Miami or Chicago.
Yeah. I think that'd be pretty phenomenal, honestly, especially because the whole concept is like bringing together young professionals. So like, what are your thoughts actually on the office environment as a whole? Bringing it back to the office, work from home, hybrid?
Yeah, no, I think it depends. I think we all hated COVID for a lot of different reasons. I think I really love the flexibility of being able to be home. And I felt personally more productive when being home, but I really miss the social aspect. And I think, I think a lot of people feel very similarly. So I almost like the hybrid version where you have the opportunity to set your schedule somewhat and have some days in the office where you get to meet people, or at least a couple times a month. And a lot of tech companies are doing that, right? But then you still have the flexibility of just being able to be at home. And especially for young people, we got used to traveling during COVID and like being in different locations and working from our laptops. So if your job allows that, then I think that's well and good. And I don't see why we can't do that. But because more people are working from home, I think it creates more broken networks, which is what we're trying to solve for.
100%. When you think about potential as a whole, kind of like within the CLOCKOUT ecosystem, within the platform as a whole, not to mention, of course, just kind of like, well, one, I guess like the potential within CLOCKOUT, but like, how do you think COVID has changed kind of like the dynamic of whether it be working from home or for like junior professionals as a whole? Because I feel like what I'm getting at is that like the young professional has definitely dealt with like some sort of like almost like evolution of some sort, right? With COVID, and of course, just like whether it be working from home, lack of training, interacting and engaging maybe like with your roommates more often, but not necessarily with professionals. Is that something that you think about when you think about CLOCKOUT's future and kind of like your background in finance, working in a proper office compared to what individuals are doing today?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of interesting themes that came out of the pandemic. I think a lot of young people in general got frustrated with how employers were not just treating them, but just treating their opportunity to get access to certain resources or people. And obviously we're seeing the Great Resignation. I mean, thinking back to banking specifically, right? Or our world, when you take people out of an environment where you have a ton of perks and we're just working crazy hours all day long, I think it gets people to self-reflect about, hey, what's important to me and what do I want to be able to do? So I think at the end of the day, like certain fields like in finance, relationship building is so important. And a lot of that is in person. So I don't see that completely going remote, even though, again, I think the flexibility at the junior level is important. And I think us requesting more resources and support and training is is totally fair. So I think things like that coming out of the pandemic was good. And I think people are listening to those voices. But yeah, I think overall, I think a hybrid structure makes sense across most industries, personally.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't think at the end of the day, well, I think Goldman may have mandated it to like fully get back in.
And I think maybe JP Morgan has for certain divisions, but I think group by group, it tends to be a little bit more flexible.
Mm-hmm. No, I really do think that learn through osmosis is definitely a part of it. Yet at the same time, like the world has systemically changed in some capacities there, where individuals have been not only, of course, been able to be productive from home, but people just think differently about kind of like time at home, time at work, and not necessarily kind of like the commute, right? That kind of is taking a hit in the middle.
Yeah, I think one bad thing personally of the work from home culture is the expectation for people to be constantly plugged in, right? You get calendar meetings filled, like your whole calendar, is filled up minute to minute, right? You have a 1 to 1:30, 1:30 to 2, 2 to 3:30, because you're eliminating the quote unquote commute and the breathing room and the time to get food and the time to do anything in between. And I think that overload has burnt out a ton of people, finance or not finance. And so I think there are some cons of just working from home if that's the culture that's expected. But I think the flexibility is definitely nice. And yeah, certain types of groups, even within finance, right? Like I think if I was trading floor style, and the whole learning by osmosis is very true, right? Like hearing people shouting across the room or like talking on phones right next to me, or if there's something going on urgently with the deal, just being able to turn to my executive director or MD is pretty useful and in general on the trading floor. But I don't have it's above my pay grade to make those decisions.
Right. No, but it's a really good point, especially on the trading side of things, when you're really kind of just learning. I've seen a little bit of like industry recently that show where a lot of it ends up being, of course, kind of like interaction driven, juniors sitting next to seniors. I've never been on a shop floor kind of setting like that, but I think that's a whole different level compared to just like private equity offices. Even though private equity offices at the end of the day, like you're generally kind of working, whether it be in your little cubicle, little office, and then you circle up for meetings, which is totally different than like, oh my God, everything's happening live.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And in my PE experience, all of us, there were 2 of us into an office. It was less like I'm learning by hearing someone directly next to me. But when I was at JP Morgan, I was trading floor style, and it was really, really helpful to just be able to stand up and say, hey, we're doing this, or we're going to this meeting, or what's the status on this? So I kind of actually liked it. Yeah.
Nice. No, that's awesome. Did you have any questions on our end? Anything about office hours that we wanted to potentially cover, or just kind of like, I guess for anyone listening, we are bootstrapped. So I wish in some ways it's interesting on like raising funding, right? It's definitely something that's come up. It's tough to like fully address unless everyone's like on board.
Yeah, no, I think being an early stage company outside of just you're wearing every single hat, right? From ops to marketing to legal, finance, and fundraising, and showcasing product market fit is only one part of the equation. And I think now that markets are where they're at, people are more risk averse. So I think as we look into raising our first fundraise too, we're focusing on certain KPIs that we may have not paid as much attention to in the first 3 months. It's not just about growth, but it's about like deep engagement and making sure that you're measuring your impact a bit more thoughtfully, especially because we're not B2B or a sexy fintech platform or crypto, I think. And you guys too probably have the same considerations, but it's challenging, but it's also exciting. I think it's like a different way of just selling your story and getting people to underwrite your mission, which is very different.
Right. Yeah. Underwriting a mission is definitely like a really interesting way to put it, because I think dilution comes up as part of it. I think also at the same time, kind of like the expectations, because how are your thoughts? Like, of course, like CVC, much broader scale, convincing CEOs to take on, this is my life at Battery, like $25 million growth equity bags, right? TA is pitching it, CVC Growth is pitching it, Advent, TCB, TA, what have you. They're all kind of pitching the same thing. Whereas like you're convincing a CEO being like, okay, you have like so-and-so, like recurring, maybe like 10, 15, $20 million business, take some shifts off the table type of situation. Whereas when you get to the other side, it's like, oh my God, like just to build something like that is just insane, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot harder convincing people when there's obviously with the CVC or JP Morgan, the track record and the brand equity is unparalleled. But then when you're talking about in their eyes, a very early stage, no name, less than 1 year startup, you have to, especially when we're not monetizing yet and we don't have the finance figures to support a crazy underwrite, you have to really sell them on the mission and the vision and some of the quote unquote more qualitative measures. But of course, there's engagement and certain other KPIs that are more relevant to consumer companies. So I think that's definitely been something that I've had to adjust to because I'm so numbers focused. I've been so numbers focused for my entire life and someone who's needed a lot of structure and certainty. But when you go onto the other side, there's a lot of dealing with uncertainty and how to spin what that looks like and how to tell a different type of story. So
totally. What type of advice would you give to junior juniors today, or call it Manasa like 10 years ago, sake of discussion. Maybe not, yeah.
I think
Even
as someone
five.
I know, as someone who, I'll say this, I was always the kind of person who needed to have a 10-year plan. And I wanted to make sure I knew what was happening after. So after CVC, I had every intention of staying for a little longer, going to get my MBA, coming back, doing corp dev or M&A, or going back into private equity or potentially some strategy role, but something adjacent to the field that I thought was stable, that I thought there was room to climb the corporate ladder, because that's how I was told success is defined just from society. And I think a lot of us are trapped into that narrative and are in that bubble. And I think it's very okay to not know and to take calculated risks, even if you are a very risk averse person, and to take baby steps into that and kind of take a step back and continue to self-reflect. So if I always like to tell people first coming into banking or coming onto the buy side to be a little bit more thoughtful and to slow down the decision-making process and know that there are other opportunities. So if you're unhappy or you feel unfulfilled, even if you want to do it for a little bit, I understand that, but there are so many different paths out there that you shouldn't get discouraged. And I think you should always have something outside of work, because I think we tend to define our life's worth by our work product and our work output, right? And that's a lot of stress. So I think you should always have some sort of outlet. And for me, that was CLOCKOUT. It was a passion project, which now became a business. It could just be, playing a sport, working on a different type of passion project, getting into dancing or singing, or having something that excites you. And then that could turn into something too. So long story short, slow it down. Things don't need to be figured out at age 22, and ask a lot of questions and talk to a lot of people, because you'll learn a lot from how they navigated their own career paths, and you can see what makes sense for you.
Nice. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I feel like it's something that we tell ourselves like here day in and day out, right? Like just being like so swamped and busy and like consistently like go position, versus like sometimes it's like take a step back and figure out kind of like what's going on and understand that like not everything needs to be done in like a certain amount of time. That definitely applies to junior individual thinking through future. If you think about like an individual, sorry, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say, especially now with on-cycle, right? For instance,
exactly.
Online, like you immediately get your summer analyst job, then you get your full-time job, and then you're thinking about, okay, what is my job after the next 2 years? And you're deciding that without having actually gone through this first job. So it becomes a rat race. And I think because we work demanding hours in this field and everyone around us is doing the same thing, it's easy to get lost in the noise. So I think, and it's not for everybody long term. So I think that's what I mean by taking the time to slow down in between and have those checkpoints with yourself and talk to other people.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, if you think about it, like 2022 individual that graduated, just started at an investment bank, and literally 2 years are set up for this investment banking role, but then they also signed up for 2 years thereafter. And in all honesty, they could even sign up for 2 years thereafter with 2+2, HBS or something deferred.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next 5 years are set basically.
Exactly. Practice.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for folks who are still on the edge or undecided, it can feel like a lot of pressure to say, oh, wow, the next 6 years are ironclad and I have to do it this way because everyone else is doing it this way.
Yeah.
You have some of that pressure from your world in banking and private equity, but also where you went to undergrad, I think, can also shape that.
And do you find that many of your undergraduate friends are kind of like still within that finance realm today, or doing interesting tech startup-y stuff as well, like mixed?
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. I think, interestingly enough, I think when I was at JP Morgan, a lot of people for the first time in my class, NYU or not, were actually not going into private equity, which was...
What were they doing, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, a lot of people were going to like different type of corp dev roles, strategy, startups, trying to become chief of staff, really interesting different types of roles within the tech space. A lot of people at the time were going to WeWork. Yeah, so it was really interesting. I think it continues to be a mix. A lot of people left before I did. Some people are still there, but some people were in private equity are now going to credit funds or just like lateraling over to different equity classes. So it kind of looks different.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely like the world is becoming more and more open to like differentiated ways of advancing your career, making money, figuring out kind of like what's a fit. If you had to do it again, you would do banking still, kind of like fresh out to where you are today? Or would you start CLOCKOUT earlier?
No, I would still do banking. Not because I think banking is the only thing that you can do out of school to set you up for success. I just don't regret my experience doing banking. I don't think you need to be doing banking, but I don't think personally, for my own individual story, I would have had the confidence and the skill set and the support system to launch CLOCKOUT in the way that I was able to without having built up in my skill, my ability to do that effectively. But you can do that by working in tech. You can do that by working in a variety of different roles. Not to say that you can't start something out of college. I just think that it tends to be a little bit harder because you don't have a lot to fall back on, unfortunately, and you just require a lot more support.
Honestly, I think the best part is that like your end market is so massive, right? I do think about, of course, like the amount of individuals that can utilize something like this. Whereas, of course, like we have to be bootstrapped because it's very, very niche and very, very focused. Whereas on your end, if it's just like young professionals, effectively goes viral, not to mention, of course, like many individuals get involved, takes over like cities to a certain degree. Not only like takes over, but of course, like starts partnering with various organizations. What does it look like? Because I'm actually part of a nonprofit LSA in New York. I can follow up on this, but like, can you tell us a little bit more kind of on the process, the value add to respectively the org, as well as, of course, the members? Are you going to start charging members and more on the organization side, take a percentage?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I can tackle the first question first. So the value add for a lot of these organizations that we work with is the fact that we are a targeted marketing tool. So a lot of these nonprofit junior boards, similar to the one that you just mentioned, or councils or professional networks, or even like young professional sports leagues like Volo and Dog Sports, are all trying to get people in their 20s and 30s onboarded. And it's really difficult for them to only market on Instagram or LinkedIn. You're not able to recruit new blood, and you're not able to like spread more awareness easily, even though they have amazing content and amazing missions. And so where we come in is, really partnering with the organizations and giving them access to a ton of different young professionals across finance, across medicine, law, engineering, and the list goes on. And they're able to recruit new members onto their boards, onto their councils. They're able to sell more tickets, right, to different fundraisers and different events, from mixers and galas and panel events. And it just creates a lot more interaction. So that's been really, really cool to see. And then yes, sadly for them, but not for us, we will be monetizing. Right now, our immediate goal is to really build that trust and traction and create that impact. There will always be a free version, but we will, given our model is pretty multifaceted, we will start to monetize across the board from a user's perspective as well as an organization's perspective, just based on the different tooling we'll provide.
I love it. That's awesome. Definitely wish you, of course, the best of luck with that, and happy to help out along the way.
We can definitely do some stuff together, so I'm excited.
Is there anything in the next, like, call it for year-end goals that you've set for yourself, something that you kind of want to like see accomplished, even though, well, yeah, I guess October, November, December, so we're almost in Q4, which is nuts to think about.
I know, it is nuts. I'm trying not to be too ambitious with the next month because
That's good.
I don't get disappointed. But I think right now our main agenda is definitely to turn a lot of these different cities online and be able to. So like I said, I think by the end of the year we'll be in SF, LA, Miami, and Austin for sure, as well as Philadelphia. And by turning on those locations, definitely getting more users, more engaged users, and really being able to build out our team in some capacity, even if it's one or two more people. So I think those are our immediate goals. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. Yeah, it's a really good point not to be too ambitious, because I mean, most of the time we're thinking like very, very ambitiously, but I love it.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie and say we're going to get like 1 million users in the next 3 months, though that would be nice.
Yeah, because honestly, you have technically like November being half a month, December being half a month. It's tough.
Exactly. It's tough. And then you get mind share from a lot of people. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a interesting next 3 months, I'm sure, for you guys too.
Yeah, I think 2023 will start off interesting. Nonetheless, of course, as people kind of think about hiring plans and what they're doing and year-end bonuses and then kind of what they want to do thereafter. But it's a sprint. And after some time, you definitely need to kind of like take a step back from how I think about it, which is literally probably like where we stand right now. I'm taking a little bit of a breather now, like 2 years in after sprinting.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's awesome. Nice. Really, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's fun.
Of course, anything else you wanted to mention, say, speak about, and then of course we can turn them into marketing material and whatnot.
Yeah, everyone come join CLOCKOUT. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I think this has been really great for me. I think through my process in banking, sell side, buy side, I think mentorship and just having that support system is so valuable. So I love what you guys are doing. And I think it's something that people shouldn't take for granted. And I think at the end of the day, your peers and the people 2 or 3 years older than you can really, really help you make the right decisions for your next career move because they've just gone through it. So anyway, I'm just saying that I love what you guys are doing and I'm excited to see
appreciate it.
Grow. I would love to be helpful. And I think everyone who's listening in and trying to figure out their next steps, obviously here as a resource too, and happy to continue chatting or answer any more specific questions.
Love it. Last point, actually, if you don't mind me asking, can you tell us a little bit more kind of like the mentors that have helped you along the way, what that looked look like? Not to mention, of course, like what we try to do is we've created a business out of it, right? So like the whole concept was like, okay, people aren't necessarily engaging and interacting in a COVID environment because you're really only connected with the people that you're like basically scheduled to connect with. So they aren't any of those like, oh, like fortuitous timing, like happenstance, running into people midtown Manhattan, let's catch up over coffee. Now, of course, like mentorship generally ends up being a bit more organic. Take away the organic element of meeting people, well, then there has to be something like, not like forced per se, but like assisted. And then of course, office hours comes in and being like very, very targeted. But we'd love to learn a little bit more around mentorship on your end. Did someone really kind of like help you out quite a bit? Be like, okay, banking, private equity is the path. I'm sure you have mentors today and advisors for the business.
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of people, whether formal or more organic mentors. I think I've had a ton of peer mentors, right? Where we learn from each other. We're in the trenches together. We're helping each other with recruiting, or those who are 2 or 3 years older than us who've just gone through the process, I think was really, really valuable. But then I loved speaking to the executive directors and managing directors when I was just at JP Morgan early on. And I really valued their advice and their outlook on life. A lot of them were very honest by encouraging of this is not the end all be all. You don't have to be here, but when you're here, let's make sure that you get the most out of it and that you hustle and that you work hard, and let me know how I can help you and who you want to talk to in XYZ industry. And I definitely took advantage of that. Sometimes you seek out mentors, sometimes they proactively try to help you. So I think it's been a combination. And at CVC, all the senior folks were really, really kind, always busy, but never too busy to kind of schedule a 30-minute chat and kind of discuss what's on your mind. All of these guys are hyper connected. So I think if you're looking to talk on certain topics or a certain industry, obviously be delicate with how you broach that subject. But I think more often than not, you'd be surprised by how willing people are to help you. So that's what it goes back to my earlier point about don't be too afraid to ask, because I think a lot of us get in our head about that. And then, yeah, with CLOCKOUT, we definitely have formal advisors on our board that we sought out, but we have a ton of people. I think it takes a village to build something of your own. So we like to exchange information with other founders, see what they're doing right, seeing what they've done that they felt was wrong, and learning through their mistakes and through our mistakes, really.
Right. I definitely think kind of that peer side, as you think about things, as we think about things, happy to keep in touch, because of course, like different business models, but at the same time, like a lot of starting a business, whether it be the landing page, whether it be think about how to make money, whether it be hiring, it's a lot of what we tend to do as well and tend to think about. And sometimes it's really just kind of that like perseverance that drives individuals forward.
Yeah. And it's more fun just talking to other people who are kind of like going through the same stuff too.
Totally. Maybe we could do like an event for founders in New York if you haven't done it already.
Yeah, we've done a couple actually early on, but we want to do more of those, like a founder series, because I think there are a ton of people building their own things across industries, and you'd be surprised. And I think it's just exciting because founders have such a positive energy a lot of the times.
Honestly, and this is kind of, maybe it'll be like the last point, but young professionals of San Francisco, my buddy started this nonprofit org out in California. It's basically like YPO for that city. I don't know if it was like licensed or he had his own thing. That's how I met a lot of people in San Francisco. And San Francisco is a lot of like, walk-in, tech networking, all this jazz. It's becoming more and more prevalent across various cities, but I thought that was like hyper beneficial. Anyone that moved there, I referenced them to like learn more about it and kind of like get involved. It was mainly like happy hours. They did some networking. And
yeah, it's all it is. It's getting people together in real life. And I think it's awesome, but I just feel like no one knows where to go to get involved with those types of like communities and orgs. So we're just trying to spread awareness and like highlight them. Of course, there's a ton of user generated content, but it's exciting to work with partners too.
Nice. No, look forward to working together. If we can help out in any capacity, feel free to let us know. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking about your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for dialing in.
Perfect. I'm sure we'll do pushing like advertising and marketing materials thereafter.
Good.
But thank you, Manasa. Hope you have a good one. Take care, everyone.
Good one. Have a good one. Take care.
Bye.